And we are back. Welcome everyone to this week's Reedsy Live, Reedsy's ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. This week, our talk is called How to Find the Right Book Editor. And who better than us to talk about it? We are Reedsy, a network who is home to pretty much the world's best freelance book editors. From all around the world, from America, from the UK, from Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand. If you need a great book editor, you can find them right here on Reedsy, and we've got a fantastic one today in Dionne McCulloch. She's been kind enough to spend a bit of time with us today, give us a presentation talking about what you might be looking for in an editor, depending on where you are with your book, and she'll give you a few tips on what to look for, what to ask for, what to expect from the experience, and yeah, should be a lot of fun. I really appreciate all you folks turning up nice and early and giving us a thumbs up. I put this little thing down here asking you to subscribe to our channel. That was left over from last time. I was doing a bit of a push because we were so close to 100,000 subscribers, and we made it last time. For those of you who were there, what a time, huh? What a rush. But I really appreciate you all joining today. Let's have a look at where everyone's from. We've got someone from Sandy Hook, Connecticut, Long Island, New York, staying in the tri-state area. Dela from Puerto Rico, fantastic. Sherry from St. Louis. Stuart McLeish from Osoyoos, BC, British Columbia. And Amy from Norfolk here in the UK. Oh, hello, I'm Martin from the team at Reedsy. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm based here in North London, coming to you wherever you are. It's close to 8 o'clock my time, but never too late for a webinar. Again, really appreciate everyone signing up for this one. Hopefully it'll be a lot of fun and you'll learn quite a lot. Bit of housekeeping, there's going to be a Q&A at the end. I'll be monitoring the comments, but we'll probably save most of the questions to the end. So if I don't bring anything up, be prepared to just re-ask it when we get to the Q&A. Who else is here? We have Abby from New Jersey. Ooh, MF Miller from Thunder Bay, Ontario. I've seen that name a few times and I can't get over it. It's a fantastic name for a town. Summerland, British Columbia. BC is really coming out in force today. We have Jimmy from Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome. And Moises from Caracas in Venezuela. Gwendolyn from Louisville, Kentucky. Amazing, amazing. Martinsville, Virginia. Ken, hey, welcome. Francis from Western New York State. Maria from California. Seems we've got the coasts covered. Well, I really appreciate everyone joining here. Yeah, so in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to bring on our guest. If you are late to this, today's webinar is about how to find the perfect editor for you. There is, of course, no single perfect editor. However, you can always find the one that meets your needs and is sort of suitable for what you need at this point in your writing journey. Dionne McCulloch, she's an editor here with Reedsy. I don't know how long she's been with us, but I had a look at some of her reviews, and they're very good. She'll tell you a bit more about herself when she joins us in a few minutes. Yeah, ooh, Julia from Bermuda. Oh, fantastic. Paul from Eastbourne in England. Joan from Penna. Ian from Queensland. They're the Australians turning up. Welcome. Mark from Omaha, Nebraska. We have Teresa from Blue Ridge, North Carolina. Fantastic. Nikki from Fontana, California. Amazing. I'm doing a bit of an experiment. I normally wear glasses, but I also realize there's a lot of reflection in them. So I've taken them off for this one and just about holding up without them. Okay, well, we're reaching 8 o'clock here, which means it's about 3 p.m. On the East Coast, noon on the West Coast. I think it's like 7 a.m. in Australia and 4 a.m. in Hong Kong or Singapore or China if you're there. We might as well get this thing started. Any latecomers, just let them know that there's going to be a replay available. They can replay this as soon as this thing finishes. Those of you who signed up through Reedsy will get an email, hopefully early next week, with a link to the transcript. So don't worry about taking any notes. The transcript will be made available with all the stuff organized in a way that should be easy to understand. Okay, fantastic. So last time we had a bit of a technical error when we brought our guest on. Fingers crossed it won't be the same again. So let's give this a try. All right. Let's welcome my guest today, Dionne McCulloch. Dionne, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Martin. Thank you
Fantastic.
for
And I can
that.
hear you.
Great.
Amazing. This is already going much better than last time.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It was so cool hearing you read out where everyone's from. I just love that I'm speaking to such an international audience right now. It must be that COVID's been hard, obviously, but the fact that we can meet like this from all around the world for events like this has got to be the best thing to come out of it. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and really excited to speak to you all in this way. So yeah, just let's jump on in.
Okay.
What I want. Oh, sorry. Go
Let me. So yeah, sorry. Let me bring on the slide deck. Judging from your background, I'm assuming you're somewhere in America, right?
ahead. No, I'm in England. I've lived here for about 13 years. But yeah, I'm from America originally, and so yeah, I have the flag back there for posterity. But yeah, I've lived here for 13 years, and but originally from New York, or from Washington D.C., and then via New York to Bath, England.
Nice. I thought I'd bring it up just in case people were wondering why it's so dark at three,
Yeah.
3 or midday in America.
There
Uh,
we go.
oh, Avione, she loves your spooky background.
I think it is. It's a bit seancey.
All right. Well, everyone, I'll be back at the end for the Q&A. Dion, if you need anything, just let me know. I'll be listening. Again, the transcript will be available at any time. If anyone asks if there's a replay, tell them they can just restart this video. Enjoy. Dion, I'll see you at the end.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, so yes, we're talking about how to find the right book editor. And I have been with Reedsy for, I think, about 5 years, and I've been editing for a little over 10. I wanted to talk about this in particular because, um, it's a difficult thing for a writer, especially if you're on your first draft or something, to really know what you need from the process of editing, and how to best get yourself to where you want to go. And so I'm really excited to be talking to you about this today. So yes, as you just said, I have international reputation. The reason for this is I live in England, but I have my agent in New York, and first started writing in New York, but really began editing in earnest when I moved to England. I specialize in story development in fiction and both narrative nonfiction, which is memoir. And I've edited books from very early stages, even from ideas, right through to people who have final drafts and are poised for publication. I've launched a UK literary consultancy into the US. So that, and just having an agent and just kind of having a foot in both markets has, kept me pretty knowledgeable about what's going on in both markets. At present, what I'm primarily looking for is full manuscripts that are kind of past the first draft stage, but I do all stages of editing. So who are you? That's a good question. I wish we were all in the same room, but from hearing from where you all are, I, of course, can guess that you're all writers. But what kind of writers? You might be a seasoned writer with a book deal on your fifth book, or you might be very, very new to writing. You might be, this is a kind of American term for people who don't know it, but it's said a lot in America, a plotter or a pantser. That means somebody who carefully plots out their full story ahead of time before they even begin writing, with index cards and cork boards and all that stuff. Or you might be someone who kind of likes to fly by the seat of their pants. They have an idea or a character that won't leave them alone, and they just start writing and see where it takes them. You might be on your first draft, or you might be on your seventh draft. Either time is a possible time to get in touch with an editor. You might have an MA in creative writing, and you may have a book deal, or you might have nothing but an idea and a dream. Every writer is on a different stage of their journey. But what's important to know is that there is no right time to work with an editor. What I'm after today is helping you to get a clear understanding of two main things. It's how the whole editorial process works, so you have the knowledge and the understanding to know where you are, so you can confidently engage an editor because you know what you want. So to get the most out of editing, that's what a writer needs. You need to know what you want. By the way, I do use the she pronoun a lot because that's my pronoun, but of course I'm talking about all of us. And the editor's job is to help you get there. So a good editor will understand that, everybody has a different goal. Somebody might want to self-publish their memoir just for their children and grandchildren, where someone else really wants to make this their career. They want to get an agent. They have a very specific goal in mind. A good editor will change how she edits and how she helps you depending on what you need. But again, the power is with you. Knowing what you want and what you need is the best way to ensure that you get it. So what that is, so story structure is a science, and I could do a whole other talk. I'm going to try not to get too deep into this but I'm passionate about it. Story structure is a science. And just like, for example, everybody knows about gravity, right? But can you explain the science behind it? Do you understand the physics and the principles behind it? Probably not. Story is the same. Everybody understands story. If you ask a 5-year-old child to tell you a story, they will probably start with once upon a time. They will have a hero, put that hero in jeopardy, have them overcome, terrific obstacles to win at the end or lose or whatever. But that innate ability to understand story actually predates the written word, and it's part of our brain, how our brains are set up. It's set up for stories. It's how we survived and thrive as a species. It's utterly fascinating. I could go on. There is this one book. I'll just pull it up really quick. The Science of Story. If anyone really wants to geek out about how stories work and why we tell them and why we need them and why they're a part of our actual biological makeup, it's fascinating. But the thing is that what an editor can do is not teach you all that science, but they will understand how the structure of a story works and can help you make sure that yours works well. So I've read hundreds of first chapters, thousands of story synopses, countless books on the craft of writing. Part of that's because of being an editor, but I was also a judge on 2 international novel awards. I've been a mentor for Pitch Wars. I've really done my kind of 10,000 hours of reading writers' synopses and first chapters. And what I can tell you now is that when things go wrong, they do tend to go wrong in the same place. Probably about 95% of stories, when they start to not work, when you start hearing an agent or someone say, oh, the story's lacking in tension, it comes down to one thing. Your hero of your story must want something. A Buddhist would tell you that if you put a human being on the planet, within 2 seconds, that person will want something. That's the same of stories. Your main character must want something. Now, in commercial fiction, that desire is often, it's something specific. It's to win the girl. It's to kill the dragon. It's to get the job. It's, to win Hunger Games. It's very, very specific and pressing. In literary fiction, and this is just kind of the big difference between these two types of fiction. In literary fiction, that would be expressed more as a yearning, a need to find a sense of place, to feel at home, to be accepted. That's really like the main difference when you're looking at the difference between commercial fiction and literary fiction. But it's absolutely, we can talk about this more. It's a pretty huge idea. We'll come back to it later. But when you're thinking about your story, whether you've got a first draft already or your early stages, think about that main character of yours and think, like, do they want something? Do I know what they want? It's harder than you think to get to that. And I think that's because that's not how we live as people. We want lots of things, and it's a lot more vague. We don't just walk around with like one splintered goal, but in a story, that's what's going on. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So Act 1 today is to help you understand the editing process so you know what you want. Act 2 of today is how to work with an editor so you then get what you want. And then we'll take some questions after that. So understanding the editing process. As I said before, there is no one time to engage an editor. There are different kind of resting or stopping off points on your writer's journey, and these are the 5 main ones. You might have a raw idea, because you might be a memoirist who wants to turn your true life story or adventure or trauma into a book. You might have an outline. You may have kind of scribble this down on a piece of paper, or you might have 50 note cards on a board mapping out your story, and you want to know from an editor if the story structure works. And even though you haven't started writing chapter 1, you might have sat down and written a whole first draft, and you got to the end and you're thinking, did I get that story that was in my head onto the page? Is it working? Sometimes it's like trying to be an architect and the building's right in front of your face. You can't see it. You have to get somebody to help you to pull back and to really look at it to see if it's working. You might have a final draft. You might have written several drafts. You feel ready to go, but you now want to share it with a professional to make sure that it's really going to catch an agent's attention. Or you might have already done that and you're poised for submission and you want somebody to help you with your submission package, your synopsis, your blurb. The ways you talk about your story are as important as your story. And sometimes for a writer, I think this is very difficult because you know the whole story so well. To condense it into an elevator pitch it can really twist you up in knots. So that's when getting somebody else to help you do that can be really helpful. So let's go through those one by one. So the first two, the raw idea and the story outline, and where that fits into the editor process. At this stage, what you might want is a coach or a mentor. I think usually called a book coach in America and a mentor in the UK. Somebody who can help you develop your idea into a story that is compelling and follows those hard and fast rules of storytelling. One example might be a real life story, turning it into a compelling book. So this is, wanted to give you some case studies from like people that I've worked with to help illustrate it. So in this case, let's call it The Hostage. Now, this is someone that I worked with. He was an aid worker in Kenya who was kidnapped by Somali pirates. He was held hostage. He was tortured. He was fake executed, and he lived to tell the story. And he sat down and he wrote the book. And he sat there looking at it, and he had some people read it. And he had this problem. It was really boring. How could it be boring when he lived through this incredible adventure? And so I worked with him as a mentor. So we kind of, he was still working as an aid worker, and he was in Burma now. And we did a few Zoom calls together. And he sent me the book that he'd written, and he'd written it. It read like a Tom Clancy book, kind of like an adventure. A lot of it was in third person because he wanted to show the things that he knew, like he found out later were going on, like his sister was calling the White House and the way the aid agency was working. And he had a girlfriend at the time who he later found out was extorting money from his agency. So he wanted all these elements in the story. So he'd written it in third person. And the strange thing that happened was it just felt like anybody's story. And here's this guy who's lived this experience that, you could only imagine. And he was held captive for 79 days. And so we had a few conversations, and I got him to start talking about different things. He didn't really mention the girlfriend, actually, and she wasn't in that first book. He did mention her when we were talking, and then he said, but I don't want to put her in the story. I said, okay. So started talking to him. Why did you want to become, an aid worker? He's from this kind of blue collar background in Philadelphia. What makes you want to go into like war zones and help people? That's not a typical path. And then some stuff starts to come out about his childhood and his father and the way that made him feel and made him want to escape from. Talking about, then he finally opened up about the girlfriend, and he living in Kenya. There's a black market for everything, and one of those things is it doesn't really cost that much money to hire someone to hurt someone else. He was properly afraid that this girlfriend was going to do that, so he wasn't making her move out. And the night that he was kidnapped, he had decided he was going to do it, and then he gets kidnapped. So in the process of these conversations, and during this all, I'm telling him, what really is like fascinating to me is how you mentally stay okay in a situation like that, where you are literally being put on the ground with your hands behind your head and told you're going to be shot today, and then they fire blanks. And they're waterboarding you, and you're starving, and you don't know if anybody knows where you are or if you're ever going to live. And he lived to tell the story. He stayed sane to tell the story. The two guys he was with lived. These aren't soldiers. These are just, kind of regular guys. He wasn't prepared for this kind of thing. That is really an incredible story. So after a few conversations, it kind of arrive at this thing where I say, it's almost as if it took, the situation with your father, the situation with your girlfriend, it was almost as if it took being actually taken hostage to then be able to live a free life. Because after he came out of this situation, he became happier than he'd ever been in his life. And it just changed things for him. And he wrote a whole new story that was all very close to him, just stays with him. It's first person. And it just turned into like an absolutely compelling story of survival. So this is the kind of thing that a book coach or a mentor can do, is to help. It's very much borders on therapy in a way, to help you to really find what is the real root of the story, and how do I need to tell it. So that's one example of that. So the first draft. A first draft, I think of it a lot like sculpture. That's what I put this funny little picture on here, but it's really like a raw lump of story. And you've made a shape out of it, and a person could look at it and say, okay, I can see that, that's there, but now the real graft begins of chiseling and polishing and taking out the bits that don't matter and accentuating the bits that do, to turn it into something beautiful. Now, one thing to think, especially for the kind of writer who sits down and writes out a full first draft, is that we do a lot of our figuring out when we write that first draft. We are figuring out the characters' backstories and exactly why they behave the way they behave and what happened to them in the past that affected that. And we might spend 2 chapters at the beginning just saying everything that's going on before the story kicks into gear. This is fine. This is a lot of real hard work. And I think that what separates the kind of the wheat from the chaff, the true writers are the ones who, after they've gotten that first draft down and they're like, this is a mess, they're not afraid to then start a fresh Word document and start over again. And it doesn't mean that that first draft isn't absolutely vital, because you've done so much work of figuring out your story and your characters and who they are and what they want and where they're going and what they're dealing with on the inside, that when you sit down to write it again, what comes out is more of closer to what you really want it to be, because you don't want to put all the figuring out. You don't want to show your work. You don't want to show all the backstory and all the history. You want the story to be engaging. And what we mean by that is that it invites the reader inside to figure things out for themselves. An engaging story is one where everything isn't laid out for you. This is why she does this. This is why she's afraid of that. That's what he's like. This is what affected him as a child. It's a way of saying show, don't tell, is where you take out all that exposition and you let the reader walk around inside of your story, seeing the little clues and the bits that you've left for them and helping them and leaving them, trusting them to figure it out for themselves. So that's the first draft. So this stage in the editing process, you might hire an editor for a developmental edit. There's different kinds of things a developmental editor might ask of you at this stage. They might want to know, for instance, what we were just talking about, what does your hero or heroine want, and what is at stake for them if they don't get it? Desire is paramount. I can't say this enough. If anyone out there right now already has a first draft or is working on something, I want you to really, if you could take anything else from this, I want you to go back and think about that main character and think, what do they want? And is it specific enough? And is it just one thing? It's hard to get it down to just one thing, but if you can, you have a stronger story. An editor might ask, does your midpoint change things irrevocably for your main character? That is also a kind of ironclad rule of storytelling. The first half of the story, your main character tends to be reactive. They're reacting to the inciting incident, the thing that kicked the story into gear. They're trying to decide, they're being tested, but something hasn't happened yet. And that's something that happens is at the midpoint, when suddenly they become proactive. They take charge of their destiny, and they're galloping towards the end of the story. An editor might ask, do we need to know all this history? All this backstory that you've put in your first draft, do we need to know it? Is it vital? Is there a different way to give the reader this information without just telling it to them? The developmental edit might also ask about your main character's internal conflict. What is it that he or she needs to overcome inside of themselves to get what they want? Now, some people might say this is the most important part of story. The external conflict is the plot. That's the things that are happening. But the internal conflict is the things that are happening inside of your main character. So in the external conflict, something happens in the world of the character to test them, and now they have a desire and they get faced with obstacles and they have to win. But at the same time, they have an internal conflict. They might be selfish or really prone to being reactive and making bad decisions. It's something that's inside of the character that actually trips them up all the time. And until they come to terms with it, until they're able to recognize this thing in themselves and confront it and change, they're going to keep making the same mistakes. And you might have heard some screenwriters, I think it is, like to say that character is story. And I believe this. I mean, when we think about the books that we love the most, we don't remember the story. We don't remember what happened. We remember the characters, and we remember them like they're people we know. And when we remember a character that way, it's because they've shown us that internal conflict. They've shown us their worst selves, their deepest flaws. They've shown us what they challenged in themselves in order to change and to grow. And we've seen them take that journey, and it's an incredible thing. And then when you've seen that in a character, it's hard to forget it. So typically, a developmental editor at this stage of the editing process will deliver your feedback in the form of a written report and a marked up manuscript. But it's important to think again about you. What works best for you? Some of my clients don't want that. They want to just do Zoom calls and talk it out, and then I'll just give them some notes. Some people prefer a ton of writings that they can sit there with it and go through it. That's just entirely up to you. So a little case study for this, for a developmental edit, the case of the missing midpoint. So in this instance, this was a fiction story about a lawyer a young woman, when her negligence in a court case ends in tragedy, she flees London for a remote Scottish island to live an isolated life. So this writer had really compelling inciting incident, and really, the fleeing of London, getting on a train and just going where no one knows where she is. She really knew her character. She knew her inside and out. Yet she couldn't finish the book, and she was stuck, and she would get to the midpoint. She just didn't know where to go. And after looking at it, there was something wrong with the beginning of the story. And usually when you get stuck in the middle, something wasn't set up right at the beginning. And in this case, it was this court case. There was something that wasn't right about why this lawyer's involvement in this court case would result in her being publicly shamed and being involved in a tragedy. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe the problem that myself and the writer couldn't understand about the past was actually the character's problem as well. Something was in the past in this court case that she wasn't able to untangle. And we came to realize that that's because there was no midpoint. We needed the new information. And that in order for this character to finish her journey and become the person she needed to become, she needed to go back to London, deal with the past, and then move on. She still had the same story goal. She still wanted to live life on her own terms. She wanted to buy this house in the remote Scottish island and start a school. And that didn't change, but the character was not able to do that until she had reckoned with her past. She needed that new information at the midpoint to bring her back to the reckoning. These are the two probably most important elements of story: the desire at the beginning and the midpoint that changes things. Without them, the story is like trying to catch its feet on the ground. It's very loose and wobbly, and you'll feel it when you're writing it, and the reader will feel it when they're reading it. Moving along. So the fourth step in the process is your final draft. Now, top tip here, I worked for the couple literary festivals actually for a couple of years, and I would be in the green room with authors and then do a little introduction for them, kind of what Martin just did for me, but it was more of it was live, and it was with authors, and it was all kinds of authors: Murakami, David Almond, Natalie Haynes, David Mitchell, all these huge authors. And since I got these precious few seconds alone with them, I decided to ask them all the same question. And it kind of blew my mind, because 9 times out of 10, all of them said it took 7 drafts to finish a book. 7 drafts. So if you're starting to freak out because you're on your 3rd draft, just remember Murakami, David Mitchell, these people who have bestsellers, who are greats of literature, 7 drafts. I thought it was quite spooky that it always seemed to land on that number 7. But if you get there and you start thinking, okay, your story is locked, like it's in place, all the elements are there, the tension and the pacing continues throughout. Now is the time to think about a copy edit. Not every writer wants a copy edit. Some find it the most magical stage in the process because it's kind of where you take that manuscript, you send it to your editor, they go through it line by line by line and tighten it and make sure that the story is consistent, that there's no repetition, that the sentence structures are active. I mean, this is right down to tinkering on a paragraph by paragraph and a line by line level. And typically what happens is you'll get your manuscript back with 2 versions, one with everything in track changes so you can see the work the editor did, and then a clean version. This can be quite fun because you don't have to do any more work. The editor is doing it all. After a developmental edit, you might have to go back and do some more heavy lifting. But after a copy edit, you just get back a polished manuscript. And this is the argument I do have the most with writers, is a lot of them want to leap to this stage. And you don't want to spend your money and your time on a copy edit when the story isn't ready. If the midpoint isn't in place, if the tension goes slack at the second half, if you spend your money on a copy edit and then you have to add a new ending, you haven't copy edited that and you've kind of wasted your time. So you really want to know that your story is ready to go. Either that's because you've worked with an editor before, or maybe you have a critical writing group of people and you've shared it. You feel confident if it's ready to go out to an agent or a publisher. But if you're not, don't rush into a copy edit. Case study for this. So the YA thriller that started at the end. So this is also a little subtitle for this one, is why you should never plan a series when you're writing book 1. I see this a lot, especially in YA, is people get in their idea the arc for a whole series, and and it's quite a feat of pacing to plot a story across 3 books. But what then tends to happen often is that the first book is a lot of backstory, and it doesn't really get going till the second book. People who do that incredibly well are like the Hunger Games or something, where that's a series that was obviously carefully plotted so that each book was also standalone. But even if you're planning a series, which is fine, each book must stand alone. And even if you're going to submit book 1 to agents, you need to submit it as a standalone. Then tell them there's series potential, and if they're interested, they'll want to know what those other books are about. But each book should stand on its own. So in this instance, the writing was incredible. She got an agent off the back of this book. Agent loved the voice. The writing was amazing, but the agent kept saying, look, but the book is starting at the end. You need to start where it ends. And she wouldn't listen. And of course, what happened was that's the same result she got from publishers. And you've just basically wasted a lot of time, because that whole process can take up to a year now. You find out what you could have known from the beginning, is that don't rush it. Make sure the story is in place. If you have typos and stuff in your book and you're sending it out to agents, that's not so big of a deal as if your voice is strong and your story is strong.
I'm actually, sorry, I was a bit confused by this. What do you mean by starting the book at the end?
Because the really interesting things that happened in that book kind of kicked off at the climax, and the agent wanted that to be the start of the book. And then what the writer had in mind for book 2 would have been like this. And this was her debut too. So the first book should be like, bam, out of the gate. And in this instance, like, it was really almost all backstory, like how she got to the place that happened at the climax of the story would have been an amazing beginning of a book.
All right, yeah. It's sort of like pre-planning for those series where people say, oh yeah, just get through the first 2 books and it gets better after 3.
Yeah, exactly. And, nowadays agents and publishers aren't going to take a gamble that like readers are going to stick around that long. They want a book that is like, in the first book. So a lot of times that is almost as simple as thinking about where am I taking this book? Where's the climax going to be? And then starting there.
Cool. Got it.
And then the last part is submission. This is a really helpful time to have an editor, I think. For one reason, it's because editors can help you with a query letter, which is an extremely precise, professional kind of thing. It has very specific needs. You want to start a certain way. You want to have a blurb that's exactly a certain amount long. You want to have a bit of a bio. And a lot of times, that's hard to write, especially a blurb can be hard to make as tight and impactful and something that really makes you want to open it up and see what the book is about. The other thing is the synopsis, which is a really tricky thing, I think, for writers to write, although a very useful tool for writers to have. You should have one anyway, even if every agent you're thinking of sending to isn't requiring one. You're eventually going to have to show it. You might have to show it then to a publisher when you go on submission. So you should always have a synopsis. And the other part of a typical submission package to an agent or publisher is the first 30 pages, could be 3 chapters. Every agent has different requirements, so it's important to check those. But this is typically what your submission package looks like and what you want to have ready. Now, one of my other top tips is if you are submitting, you don't need to proofread your entire manuscript. No agent's turning someone down because they've got some typos in the manuscript. They're reading for voice, they're reading for story, they're reading for a book that they know that they can sell to a publisher. If you're self-publishing, that's different. Then you do want to have a proofread. Some self-publishing companies will roll that into a package. Also, there's a lot of excellent proofreaders on Reedsy. Definitely want to proofread if you're self-publishing because once it's out, it's out. But if you're planning to send to agents, it's not something you really need to worry about as much as you should the story. It's a little case study on that. This screenshot, which you can't really see, but Martin, if you go ahead one, I typed it out there. This is from yesterday, from probably the top literary agent in the UK. I think she had the top 3 books in the Sunday Times bestseller list like 2 weeks ago. And sometimes she does questions on her Instagram story, and this just fits so perfectly. I threw it in there, and that's her cat. She's actually a friend of mine too. And someone asked her, what's the most common mistake in submissions? And she said, not having a clear enough idea what your story's about. What is the source of conflict and tension, and why are readers going to keep reading? This is another way of saying exactly what I said about the main character's story goal. If you think about the space between what somebody wants, what's at stake for them if they don't get it, and the obstacles standing in their way between getting what they want and not getting what they want, that is what we mean by tension. I'll take the Hunger Games because that's just an example that most people know that story. She has to go into this battle, and if she doesn't, everybody in her township isn't going to eat. That's life and death stakes, and she has to win. And also, she will be killed if she doesn't win. So that is an unbelievable tension. Like, she needs to win. She doesn't want to murder people, but if she doesn't, her people go hungry and she dies. So you got stakes up to here. You've got a very clear and specific story goal. That's unbelievable tension, and you can't put that kind of story down. So next steps. So now you know where you are in the editing process. How do you get the most out of it? So this is about working with an editor. I want to go through some things to ask for specifically from a prospective editor. I want to talk a little bit about how to receive critical feedback and genre and why that might drive you nuts. So hiring an editor is a pretty big deal. It's an investment in yourself as a writer, and and it's a courageous thing to do, I think, because you're also opening yourself up for critical feedback. If you're going to do this, when you do this, you should walk into it with total confidence, knowing exactly what you want and feeling confident that you're going to get it. So if you're after a developmental edit, I think it's really important to ask to see a sample report. That way you'll be able to judge how that editor delivers their feedback. Are they specific? I hate to say this, but there are bad editors out there. Something like Reedsy is really good because they vet the editors. I had to do interviews. I had to have like a certain amount of thumbnails of books I'd worked on before I could even go on Reedsy. They check your background and what you've done for your job. So you can be pretty confident. And but I know especially in the U.S. too, like a lot of editors are just advertising, and you don't really know what you're going to get. And I've seen some inferior editor reports where they'll spend 3 pages talking about like layout and margins and stuff. And that's not so important. They need to be able to engage with your story, to have ideas about your story. So ask to see a sample report, and you should see feedback that doesn't just point out what you're doing wrong. It should also just as important to point out what you're doing right, so you know what you do well. Do you really write amazing dialogue? Maybe you're not so good with like the structure of a story, but my God, you can create a character that people don't forget. Maybe it's your visual descriptions of things. Knowing what you do well is as important as knowing what you need to work on. So look for a sample report that really is uplifting, kind of, what's the word? That it's really cares about the story. You should be able to just get a sense of caring, because an editor, a good editor, really does care. And there's a lot of love in editing, because you really have to get very close to a writer, to their idea, and also what they want to make happen in their story. So you should get a sense of that in a sample report. If you're after a copy edit, I would say to ask for a sample copy edit of your pages. I think this is very powerful. You can immediately tell, because copy editing isn't just like following the rules of grammar. It's kind of sinking into your voice and your way of writing, and then making that better. Copy editor, there's a lot of style in it, actually. It's not just, it's not so much of a mechanical thing. It's just as much about understanding what you want to achieve and then helping you do that. And whatever you do, you might be completely confident over email that this is the right person for you, but it's totally fine to ask for a face-to-face, like a Zoom call or even a phone call, just to be able to really, get to know this person who you're going to trust with your story. But in all cases, I think you should expect your editor to have ideas about your story, about how to make it better, to understand what you're trying to do, and how to take it to the next level. Next thing I want to talk about is how to receive critical feedback on your writing. I just included this. It's actually a column I wrote on this for the Writer magazine. But what's in that column is 5 kind of key points. The first thing is, don't take it personally. It's very, very hard to separate yourself sometimes from your story, because it's you on the page. But don't take it personally, because don't forget that the criticism isn't about you, it's about your story, and it should be criticism that is couched in like helpfulness and constructive criticism. Whatever you do, sleep on it. This is especially true, maybe more so if you're submitting to an agent and you get feedback back from the agent. Agents can be a little bit more like just direct and straight to the point, and versus like an editor who's going to kind of try to be a little bit more instructive. An agent might just get straight to the point and tell you. And because I'm friends with some agents, I know the kind of thing that they deal with people slamming back to them with an email, you just didn't understand my story or whatever. Never reply. Always sleep on it. Give yourself a beat and then look at it again, because sometimes actually they're giving you some really, really vital information that can help you make your story better. And if you're working with an editor, one thing to know is you don't have to agree with all of their story points, but you need to make a darn good case for not wanting to go along with what they're suggesting. There's probably a reason that they're saying, don't kill your main character in the second half of the book before the ending, or, you really have to have like a solid reason for breaking the rules of story, and you have to understand them and understand why you're breaking them if you want to. So, you don't have to change everything an editor says, but you do have to know why you don't want to. And constructive criticism, it shouldn't make you feel bad about yourself as a writer. It should always take you from where you are to the next place that you need to be. I always aim for instructive criticism. Like all these books about craft, I've read them all so that you don't have to. And what I'm trying to do with my editing is to not just help you with your story, but help you to become a better writer. so that you can take that into the next books that you write. And the last thing is always ask for clarification. It's absolutely fine. You might want to think about this when you're going into a developmental edit, is ask to be included in the price, that maybe a couple weeks after you've received your report and you've read through it, you've digested the information, that then you get to have a follow-up Zoom call for an hour or something, just to either go through anything or maybe to brainstorm changes to the plot with your editor. I think a follow-up is always a good idea. And pay attention. The last thing I wanted to say, sorry on that, Martin, is pay attention to feedback, even the feedback that is difficult. I don't know if anyone knows the memoir by Tara Westover called Educated. It was kind of a big bestseller, and I met her soon after it was published, and she was talking about the first readers that read it, her first draft, and they didn't like it at all. And they said, "We don't trust you. You feel like an unreliable narrator because you're talking about these really horrible kind of abusive situations you're in, but you're making it into a joke." And she felt really hurt by that. Like, how can you not believe me? I'm writing my true life story. And then she realized that, what was going on was really that she needed to unpack these memories and look at them again in a way you don't, especially with trauma. And that, one way to deal with trauma is to turn it into a joke and treat it lightly. And that was but she was writing that way. And so while the feedback she received really stung, after she really, really took time to understand it, she realized what it meant and why she needed to go back to the page. So now just one last thing is a note on genre. It's totally normal for it to drive you nuts. Martin, if you go ahead on the next bit of the slide, you'll see why. This is like, just, that's just, in commercial fiction, genre is important. What you need to remember is that genre is basically a marketing tool. It's a way for booksellers to sell books, but how they organize the bookshop. It's a way for agents to market books to the right publisher. It's a way for publishers to market it to booksellers. Some people know very clearly because they really love noir, crime, and they read it a lot and they write it a lot and they have no problem going, this is exactly what my book is. Some people just have a story and then they find themselves having to try to decide, is it like a paranormal romance or is it a YA thriller? What is this? And ultimately, my advice is that it's not for you, the writer, to tie yourself up with those questions while you're writing. It's for you to write the best story that you can write, the most real story that you can write, and then you get the help of an editor, someone who knows the market. So if you're that's something to look for in your editor. If you are having issues of genre and it needs to be pitched just right, you do need to know, and it does need to be in your query letter. But if you are having difficulty, look for an editor who really knows the marketplace where you're planning to try to pitch your book, so you can get help with that. So, talked a little longer than I thought, so sorry. We're going to go on with some questions, but I just wanted to say one last thing, and it's really important. I want everyone, all you writers out there right now, to know that your story really, really matters. To be a writer is really, I think it's an act of bravery. Anyone can write, but a writer is really born when you take that story, that sweat and blood that you put onto the page, and you share it. You put it out into the world. You submit it to a competition, or you submit it to an agent or a publisher. You share it with a critical writing group. You send it to a friend. These are acts of true, true courage. And if anyone is on that path right now or has already done that, you should be really proud of yourself, because that's when you get to call yourself a writer. So let's do some questions.
Amazing. Yeah, let's hit the questions up while we wait for the questions to come in. I noticed there's 770 of us here. There's only 140 likes. If you enjoyed the presentation so far, please do think about giving us a thumbs up and maybe subscribe to the channel. All right, let's see if we can pick up some of the questions here. What was the event? Oh, this is just from me. What was the event you said that David Mitchell was at?
The Bath Literature Festival.
Okay. Was Murakami there as well, you said?
Yeah, he was.
Did they speak to each other? Because I remember reading David Mitchell's debut novel, Number 9 Dream, and just thinking, this is like a Murakami book.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think it was the same one. They're both too big. They were probably headlining different festivals.
Probably in their own trailers.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. All right, David Basinski asks, uh, editor gives feedback and then you correct it. Does the editor recheck it? I guess this sort of depends on whether you're going through traditional publishing or if you're going through as an indie author. How common is it for one of your clients to have you go back through their edits, at least developmentally?
It usually that definitely happens. Sometimes it's maybe it's early stages of an early novel, and there's a lot of work to do, an early draft, and so I'll send feedback, and then um, yeah, it's something that's usually because obviously reading time is part of it. So if it's like an 80,000 word book, and I've read it through once and given all the feedback, and they've gone and reworked it again, what you might then ask for is an assessment, which is a kind of faster read, and then like a shorter letter. It's quite like what an agent would give you. And generally that would be a separate piece of work unless you've agreed it differently at the beginning. But that's maybe the difference between a developmental edit, which is a much deeper, more comprehensive look at the story, and then an assessment, which will just say like, okay, the pacing is going much better. You still kind of need to work on the ending. It's a bit more overall.
We're getting variations of this question, and it's a tricky subject because it's about money. But of course, Jules Box asks, "What is the cost range for an editor at the various stages?" It's a bit of a how long is a piece of string kind of thing. What are the sort of considerations you take, Dion, when you sort of choose how much to quote on a specific project?
Length obviously is just the most obvious one, but I usually ask, even if they haven't sent it, I'll go ahead and ask for a synopsis because it gives me a way to see the full arc of the story and understand like how much work might be needed for that. I pretty much follow. I think Reedsy has like a calculator of like by word count, and I pretty much follow that. It's it's somewhere around like 17 to 24p a word or something like that. I don't know, but it's basically based on the length of the book.
Yeah. So I wrote that post a couple of years ago. And between you and me and everyone else here, we're having to update that because it didn't take inflation into account. Uh,
Yeah,
so there'll be changes on that one. However, the thing we've sort of found is the consideration, as always, is word count. If you go to that post, I think the link is in the uh, description below. There's a little calculator we have where you sort of put in your genre because we find, like broadly speaking, depends what genre you're working on. If it's something like nonfiction that requires, I think, sometimes a bit of research or specialist knowledge, the per word rate does go up. If you're dealing with someone with a bit more experience, perhaps you'll see the rate go up. But yeah, what Dion said about like actually getting your pitch, your synopsis right, because from the feedback we've had, there are some editors who will absolutely love something that comes in and actually want to work on it and may sort of price themselves accordingly. It's not going to be a massive discount, but you can sort of
yeah,
see the projects they really want to work on versus the stuff that they know is going to be a bit of a slog for them.
yeah. That's definitely part of it.
Okay, let's see. Uh, Evian asks, how will I know if I need a developmental edit? She says, excellent presentation.
Thank you. Um, if you haven't, well, I think an editor should help you with that. If you haven't worked with an editor, or maybe you might be married to an editor, or you might have a group of friends online who are all writers who are really adept at giving critical feedback. If you've had your book really like assessed the story by someone, then possibly you feel ready to send it out to an agent or something. Um, there's nothing wrong with testing the waters by maybe sending it out to an editor, sending a synopsis in the first chapter and a bit of a blurb, and seeing what they think.
Cool. All right. I've got a question here. This one also has popped up a few times. Wendell asks, is there any sort of contract with editors to safeguard your hard work from theft?
I remember this being asked a lot when I was in a literary consultancy, and I gotta say, it's never come up. I've never heard of it happening. I think it's just there is no such idea as execution. There's no such thing as an idea that's so good that someone's just going to go write that book. Um, and the truth is that so many books are kind of almost the same idea, but totally different executions of them. I've never in all my time heard of an editor stealing a writer's work. I just can't even fathom it happening.
Yeah.
It's
Like,
too personal. It's like stealing someone's face. It just wouldn't work.
yeah, you couldn't go back to like 1995 and like tell yourself like, okay, you're gonna write a book about a boy wizard who goes to a school. We're gonna be rich now. Go for it.
Yeah, you could do that right now. You could steal Harry Potter and it still wouldn't work. Like you can't. You just can't really steal a story. I don't think.
Like there was a story I think in the news recently of like book theft, and now it's like the sort of first instance I've seen of it. But it was that Italian guy who had been like requesting galleys and then
Yeah,
just sort of slightly releasing them, and like that's kind of real low level book theft.
yeah. I didn't change them.
Okay, Edmund has a question. Must the midpoint be one specific incident at one point in time, or can it develop over a few chapters?
I think it can develop. It depends on the story. Sorry, I hate to say it depends. Like in movies, it's very specific, and you can test this in films. It's really interesting. Like you can pause a film when you suddenly realize that everything's changed, and you'll look and you're right in the middle. Um, you know, uh, commercial fiction that tends to be that specific. Like you can open a book to the middle and almost be in the chapter. I think you would want it to be in a chapter because just like the inciting incident, it should be a specific thing that happens. It's not generally like a slow realization because realizations are quite boring to read. It should be like an event. And that, just like the inciting incident, it's an event that kind of kicks something in. It might be a party is the event, and the party happens over the course of a full chapter. But yeah, it should be as specific as possible. The more specific it is, the better it'll be.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing of like that's what dramatization is. Like in a stage play, all the sort of interesting stuff happens on the stage, when in real life it'll probably happen spaced out, over months and months and months. But you do like need that one moment that sort of everything hinges on.
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh, this was sort of mentioned, I think, earlier on. Fran asks, when should you not hire an editor?
This is a good question. I have definitely had queries where I've said, I don't think you should work with an editor yet. I think the most important time is at the beginning. If you have like, when you're in the inspiration stage, when it's like a brand new idea and you're in the first draft and you're just starting to work on it, I advise people to keep it to themselves and just spend more time with it. Like you can tell sometimes it's just not baked enough yet. And it's a very like vulnerable stage in the writing process. And sometimes receiving critical feedback too soon can it's like popping a balloon, it can deflate your idea. It can make you feel less confident. I think sometimes when you've just, especially if it's something very personal, or it's just a story that is like very close to your heart, but you haven't finished it yet, I would advise a lot of times to just keep going and get that full draft, get the whole thing out on the page. Even if you're scared it's not working, just keep going. And then once you have a full draft, you can start working on improving it. But sometimes it's just, I think the most important time to have an editor in the process before the book is written is if it's a true story, a memoir, because you kind of the material already exists. But if it exists only in your imagination, a lot of times it's better to just get it on the page first, for better or worse, and then talk to an editor.
Cool. And I thought I might as well jump in at this point to sort of give a brief description of how Reedsy works. Basically, as Dion said, we have, I think, a few hundred, if not, hundreds of editors that we've spent the last few years vetting, making sure that they're sort of who they say they are, that they do have a background, that they, consistently deliver, what authors need. So if you sign up to Reedsy for free, you can basically browse for them based on keywords or certain genres, or even where they live, if that's important to you, though it rarely is. And then you can basically send one request, so your synopsis, word count, all the details about your project, and you can pitch it to 5 editors at any given time, and they can get back to you within 48 hours usually and tell you, okay, this is what I could do for you, give a bit of a description, offer you a sample edit potentially, and then give you a quote for that. So if you do want to know how much it costs, just sign up for a free Reedsy account. It doesn't cost you anything to send any quotes in. And give that a go. Okay, let's see. Oriadi asks, is it not possible to use one editor for every stage of editing?
Yes, absolutely. Some editors prefer certain ones. I do every stage except proofreading. I don't do proofreading. But I think that can be really helpful, actually. I've definitely done stuff right from the early stages of development through to a copy edit. And you can, if you have that kind of working relationship with an editor and you really work together, and also editors, we get really invested in stories. And some of the writers I work with, I've become really good friends with, or I still keep in touch with, and they send me news or ask for advice. You're developing a relationship, and if you find a good relationship and you want to keep working with that person, then definitely good idea.
Okay. Oh, here's a question. It pops up every other one. But how do you feel about prologues?
I'm not the hugest fan because I think unless the prologue should be telling something that's completely out of time of the main story. If it's like, I'm trying to think of a good prologue. It should be. It just always makes me feel like I'm waiting for the story to start, and I just want it to start. Maybe I'm impatient, but unless there is something like it's something that happened to like an ancestor that their ghost is part of the story now, and that's going to come up, and so you want to like put that in. You can always write a prologue and take it out, and it's not going to like hold you back. But I think if you're writing contemporary fiction or ghost story, crime, or just something like that, you want to get to the story as fast as possible. And now more than ever, I think prologues were much more in fashion. I think they're kind of out of fashion, and so people are just going to want to get the story started.
Cool. Mama Sensei asks, is it imperative that the main character has an obvious desire?
Yes, it is. This is a tough one. People want to say, oh, but it's this, but it's also a bit of that. It really is. If you think of any story that you love, really test this. Go to your bookshelf and look at it, and you're gonna see that they all had something that they needed. Because this goes back to the science of story that I was talking about. Like, well, the reason we tell stories, they're like codified lessons that we pass on. It goes right back to fairy tales, and we're showing people how to live and how to survive and how to overcome obstacles and how to thrive. And that's why we tell stories. And so each story is like a slice of that. And so if your main character doesn't want anything, or wants two things or three things or a little bit of this and a little bit of that, that loses the tension, because we're always searching for that lesson of like, if this happens to me, or I've imagined this happening and having to survive this kind of situation, that's where the tension in the story is. And so you really want that. I really think that every time I have a book is having trouble, that's why it doesn't have an obvious desire.
Another question here about working with beta readers. How much can beta readers do in terms of advising and feedback versus what advice and feedback editors give?
I think beta readers are great and valuable. And if you're even in just like a book club, like it doesn't have to be another writer. It just has to be someone who really reads a lot and loves stories. You do have to consider that if it's like your mom or your best friend, that, they might not want to hurt your feelings. It might not be the kind of critical the tough work that you really need. But I think anyone should have beta readers before you have an editor, because if you have three people read your book and they all say, I don't really like this character, or I don't really know why she's doing this thing, or I don't know why he needs to, do this thing in chapter 5, that's a big tell that something's wrong. I mean, everyone who reads and loves stories is capable of connecting with a story. And if you have a group of people who read and have the same disconnect, that's something to take into account. And then you can have a story that's further along in the process before you come to an editor.
Here's a potentially sensitive question, and feel free to pass on this. Do editors ever recommend your manuscript to a publisher or agent?
That is, yes, is the short answer. Yes. I've done that. Rarely, because I think that's part of your process, but I've gotten really close to writers and their stories and really thought this has got a lot of potential. This is not something I would ever do as a business arrangement. I don't know if people do, but I wouldn't. But if I do know agents, and if there's something I think, oh man, this is such a good story, and I know this certain person is going to really want to know about it, with the permission of the writer, I might, introduce it to them, or, that way it kind of gets on the top of their pile. Yeah, so that definitely.
Yeah. It's like,
But
yeah,
should
it's
go,
not,
yeah, that's rare.
yeah,
And
it's
you
not
should go
something,
thinking that's going to happen.
yeah, it's not something to be expected. Otherwise,
No.
you could end up in the logical loop of like, Dion, I paid you to edit my manuscript, and it should be good enough for you to recommend to your agent friends now. Why don't you do that? It'd be
Yeah, and it's not, and yeah, it's not. It's very rare, and it's. It, I don't think that would be your best as a writer, your best route to take. And just to add that I 100% believe in the slush pile. It works. I know every agent, they have junior agents who read them, but like stuff stands out. And if you have a really well honed pitch so that the right person can get to it, you will, and your story works, you will find, you will rise to the top. It's not like sending stuff down a big hole to submit to agents. They really do read everything.
Okay, I'm just going to do a few more. We're just pushing over the hour, but there's some good questions here. JK, just kidding, asks, do you recommend publishing without an agent?
As in, well, if you mean self-publishing, sure, that's definitely becoming more of a viable option for people. I don't think, and then in the case of nonfiction, it's definitely possible to submit to publishers straight without an agent. But most publishers of fiction will only receive submissions from agents. So you might be limiting yourself, but there's no hard rule that you can't submit to a publisher straight. Or if you know somebody or it's a friend of a friend who's in a publishing house, for sure. That's actually how I got my first agent. Was I sent it to a head of an imprint at Penguin, and he loved it. And but he couldn't like do the contract with that agent, but he sent me agent names, and then of course they were all like, "Oh, you've already got a publisher interested."
I think this sort of, yeah, you touched on this earlier, but it's worth going over again. Craig asks, should you get an edit of the first 50,000 pages? 50,000 words, let's say, or wait for the entire book? As in, what would you say about getting an edit on a partial manuscript?
Definitely, that's possible. And the most likely thing is that what's happened is you've gotten stuck at around 50,000 words, which is very common. And it has to do with what I was talking about setting up the story structure at the beginning. So if you're stuck and you're just banging your head against the wall and you don't know how to end the book or it's just not working, yeah, that's a great time to call in an editor because they can look at where it is and tell you it probably needs some reworking in the first 50,000. And then all of a sudden the ending is going to be very clear to you. There's no right time. Definitely, halfway through or 2/3 of the way through, you feel stuck, then that's a great time to reach out.
All right. Here's a sort of follow-up question from an early one. What is the midpoint for a character that is proactive from the start and doesn't change? For example, I guess, like a Dashiell Hammett hero.
Well, so in it, like in crime or detective story, it's sort of like a sitcom, like as in that, like the situation is always the same. Usually, that is a character that doesn't change, or at least not in an internal way. But really, the driver of those stories is the crime. So if it's like this guy has to solve the murder, otherwise something's going to happen to his family. At the midpoint, it might not be about the character. The thing that's going to change is about the crime. Something's going to shift for him, but there still has to be a midpoint. But crime is a kind of specific genre where you see the character having, it's a preset, and it's the crime itself and solving the crime that drives the plot as much as the character.
Cool. Abby asks, a writer friend suggests that I go direct to agent, skipping the editor. What do you think?
There's absolutely no reason not to do that. I mean, if you feel really positive and you know what you want, you love your story and you're ready to go, and definitely have people, if you've got a writer friend, read it, then yeah, go for it. You don't, there's nothing to, what I would suggest is that you submit to like 5 agents at a time, no more than that. And you get your package all ready and you send it out, and then you don't submit to every single agent on the planet, but just 5, and then wait and get the feedback, see what they say, if they give you feedback. And then think about, is this working? Maybe you'll get picked up right away, and that's amazing. But if you start hearing the same reason for rejections, then maybe if you need work, maybe then you go to an editor. But no, there's no reason that you need to have an editor.
Cool. And just one final quick one, a bit of a procedural one. Can you do multiple submissions to the same publishing house? Maybe the same agency, perhaps?
Easy to answer, no, you cannot. If you're sending to an agent at an agency that has 12 agents, you can only send it to that one agent. You really Agents really get upset if they get into a position where they love a story and then they find out that the agent down the hall also loves that story, and they're going to be really upset about that, because you need to be very transparent with agents. If you get an offer from another agent, it's totally cool to reach out to the rest of the agents that have it and say, I've had some interest, so I just want to check in with you if you're interested. All about transparency. But as far as editors in a publishing house, if you're going direct, or agents, they don't tend to share stuff. So you want to just choose one agent at a time. And once that agent closes it off to you, then you can go to a different one, but not two at once.
And I'll answer this one. Rebecca's asked, what are the best resources to find an agent? My team has worked up a bunch of great resources over at Reedsy. If you go to blog.reedsy.com, we have blog posts on how to write a query letter, how to submit, things about finding comp titles. There are a lot of great examples there as well. We also have an agents directory that you can use to sort of root out agents that may or may not be open to submissions at any given time. Just head over to blog.reedsy. We've got a lot of good stuff. It's all free, so don't worry about that. And with that final question, thank you, Dion, for that. That was amazing. How's it for you?
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope it helped. And good luck to everybody who's writing. Keep going.
All right, amazing. We've got another webinar in a few weeks. I've yet to post it live, but it's going to be talking about ghostwriters. If you're not super familiar with how ghosts work, this is your opportunity to pick their brains and see what the deal is. Thank you, Dion. We'd love to have you on again in the future if you'd like to return. But thank you so much. You can find her at reedsy.com/Dionne McCulloch. The link again is in the description below. If you've got something you think should be suitable for, do send her a request. If not, one of the other fantastic editors here at Reedsy. Thank you again for your time. Thank you, Dion, and we'll catch you all soon. Goodbye.
Bye.